The Kia e-Niro was a truly groundbreaking car. When it went on sale in 2019, it was the first EV to offer a huge electric range, not with a huge price tag. But even just a couple of years into its life, the EV landscape is almost unrecognisable from how it was back then. And the car itself has had some pretty big changes too, including the introduction of a new, cheaper, smaller battery option. But is this car just as impressive now as it was back then? We're going to run through all the details of it, and we're going to tell you exactly how it compares to its current crop of electric SUV rivals. But before we start, don't forget, go to whatcar.com to save thousands of pounds off your next new car, or just search for What Car Deals, click on the link, look in our description below, and subscribe to our channel if you want to see lots of other new car reviews. Outside, there isn't actually anything new to tell you because the design hasn't changed in the e-Niro's lifetime. So that means that it's still based very much on the Niro, which has been available as a hybrid and then as a plug-in hybrid since 2016. And the only difference really cosmetically between those cars and this, or the most noticeable difference, is that the tiger nose grille at the front of the car has been filled in, and you've got a charge port here on this electric version. But while the design hasn't changed in the e-Niro's lifetime, there is something else that definitely has changed.
And that is the cars that the e-Niro is competing against. When it first went on sale, it counted the very similar Hyundai Kona Electric as a rival, but that was it. You had cheaper, smaller cars like the Renault Zoe and Nissan Leaf, and more expensive ones like the Jaguar I-Pace and Tesla Model S, but the e-Niro didn't have much in the way of direct competition. That is very different now. Cars like the Peugeot E2008, Citroën EC4, DS3 Crossback E-Tense and VW ID3 are all up against the e-Niro.
So how does this interior stack up today? Well, actually, pretty well. It's got quite a conventional layout and look inside. Something like an E2008 definitely has more visual appeal, and also the quality there is a little bit better than it is in the e-Niro as well. But you've still got soft touch materials up on the dashboard here, a nice subtle bit of design there, although there are some harder, scratchier, cheaper feeling plastics dotted around lower down, and also a bit of wobble in this center console. So perhaps the quality is one area where the e-Niro is starting to lag behind some of its latest rivals. Although having said that, it is still on a par with what you get in the VW ID3. And also the tech inside here actually still is very good compared to everything else. There are a few different trim levels you can choose from, and we'll talk more in detail about what you get with each one later. But if you go for entry level 2 trim, then you get an 8-inch touchscreen infotainment system that gets Apple CarPlay and Android Auto as standard. But if you go for 3 trim and above, then you get this bigger 10.3-inch system, which also has wireless phone charging and sat-nav, although I don't know why you'd need sat-nav with the infotainment system, because you can just use Google Maps or Waze through the smartphone mirroring functions. But whichever system you go for, it's responsive, got a pretty clean layout that's easy to get your head around, and generally it is quite impressive. If you do go for the bigger screen, you get slightly sharper graphics, and also some of the icons are a bit bigger as well, so it's just slightly easier to hit them on the move. Compared to the very best systems in this class, the e-Niro isn't quite as good from a usability perspective, because if you look at something like the Mazda MX-30 and the Mini Electric, admittedly smaller cars but still electric cars, they're slightly easier to use because they have rotary dials which allow a bit more physical interaction with the screen that doesn't require you taking your eyes off the road and trying to hit a button that you can't actually feel. But this system is still much better than what you get in the VW ID3, and it's also better than the E2008 system. Again, from a usability perspective, because with the Peugeot system, you've got to dive into various menus and sub-menus to change the climate control settings. Whereas on the e-Niro, you have this whole separate panel with physical dials and buttons that makes that very simple to use indeed. Elsewhere up front in the e-Niro, there's quite a lot of storage on offer. So up here, this is where the wireless phone charging is. Below that, you've got another helpful open storage space. Down on the center console, you can see you've got this slightly quirky gear selector rotary dial, as well as very helpful physical buttons to control the seat heating and the ventilation, the heated steering wheel, and also to cycle through the different drive modes available. And under here, there's 2 cup holders, and the armrest also has a handy cubby hole underneath it as well. You also have a very good driving position in the e-Niro. You sit noticeably higher up than all of its rivals really, and from behind the wheel, it definitely does feel like an SUV. And it feels like an SUV in the back as well. You've got plenty of room. If you're just under 6 foot as I am, you can see headroom is pretty good. I am a little close to the roof lining, but it still doesn't feel cramped. Legroom is good, enough to stretch out in, and it generally does feel pretty spacious back here. In fact, it's only really the Kia Soul EV, the MG ZS EV, and the ID3 which are on the same page as the e-Niro in terms of spaciousness at this price range. So it is impressive for that. But there isn't really anything clever to point out back here. So you have some Isofix mounts, you've got an armrest with a couple of cup holders if no one's sat in the middle seat, and also actually on this trim, the outer rear seats are heated. So you have this button up here to control that, but the rear seats don't slide, they don't recline, so there's nothing else clever to point out really. But to be fair, at this price range, the other rivals don't do anything clever either. The boot is pretty good compared to its rivals. You can fit 5 carry-on size suitcases under the parcel shelf back here, which is actually the same number that you can get in the MG ZS and the Peugeot E2008 and also the VW ID3. And you can see it's a very simple open space back here, no nasty surprises, no awkward lumps in the floor or anything like that. A bit of wheel arch intrusion on this side, but you've still got a little bit of space up front to try and help. Plus, what's really handy is that you've got quite a bit of underfloor storage, which is enough to leave the charging cables there, which is very handy. And also that's something you don't get with the ID3.
But none of this is particularly new for the e-Niro. The bigger change is under the bonnet.
Well, under the floor, actually, the big news for the e-Niro since its launch has really been the introduction of a smaller battery pack option. So the first e-Niro you could buy, and the one that we're driving today, gets a 64 kilowatt hour battery with a 201 brake horsepower electric motor. And that has a claimed electric range around 280 miles. But in our real range testing, we discovered that it's more like 250 miles in genuine real world driving conditions. But you can now buy an e-Niro in 2 trim. And if you do that, then you get a smaller battery, a 39 kilowatt hour battery with a less powerful 134 brake horsepower electric motor. But what does that change? Well, the less powerful electric motor means that it's slower, and the smaller battery means that it can't travel as far on a full charge. So the 39 kilowatt hour version of the e-Niro is almost 2 seconds slower from 0 to 60 miles per hour. But you're probably more interested on the impact of the range. So if you go for that 39 kilowatt hour battery, then it has a claimed electric range around 180 miles, which translates into about 140 miles in real world driving conditions. And that's 100 miles less than the 64 kilowatt hour version of the e-Niro.
Quite a big reason the e-Niro was such a game-changing car was because of its enormous 250 mile real world range. So if you remove 100 miles from that for the 39 kilowatt hour version, is the e-Niro still a fantastic car? Well, it's still good, but it does really lose one of the main reasons you'd buy one.
It is, as you'd imagine, the cheapest version of the e-Niro. But for around £4,000 if you're buying outright, you get the bigger battery and 100 miles more range, which for many people is going to be a deal breaker, isn't it? And it's not just about the range, because the 64 kilowatt hour version is the better car overall as well. It actually rides better. You might think that that smaller battery would help the ride because it's lighter, but that isn't the case. And this version of the e-Niro with the bigger battery is really impressive for the ride. It's actually one of the most comfortable electric cars that you can buy. It's really well controlled and settled, nicely cushioned as well. It's very impressive. And the handling is perfectly decent. It's got pleasantly weighted steering that's precise. It feels relatively agile as well. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's exciting, but the only thing that's genuinely better than the e-Niro at this price range is the ID3. The e-Niro also has really good brakes, and I'm not just talking sheer stopping power, but a lot of electric cars have quite bad feel in the brake pedals, so they can be really grabby or really inconsistent, so it makes it really difficult to stop smoothly. But there's no such problems in the e-Niro. It's really consistent and it's really simple to just stop nice and smooth. Plus, of course, it has regenerative braking, so when you lift off the accelerator, the car will slow itself down, and you can increase or decrease the impact it has by using these paddles on the steering wheel. But still, no major mechanical changes with the e-Niro apart from that smaller battery. So even with lots more competition now, the e-Niro remains a fantastic electric car inside and on the road.
But if you do want to buy an e-Niro, how should you spec it? Well, we'd stick with 2 trim. Even though it's the entry-level spec, it still gets things like climate control, part leather seats, automatic lights and wipers, and adaptive cruise control. You can have it either with the smaller battery or the bigger battery. The price difference between them is about £2,000, and we definitely think it's worth going for the 64 kilowatt hour bigger battery version because of its significantly better range. It's also still eligible for the UK government plug-in grant, whereas 3 and 4 Plus trim aren't. When it comes to options, well, there aren't any, apart from metallic paint. Silver is standard, but anything else costs £595. So that's how you should spec an e-Niro, and here are a few other things to know about the car.
When the e-Niro first went on sale in the UK, some buyers had to wait up to a year to actually get hold of it. That's because the demand was huge and there was only about 1,000 units available. But Kia says no such problems now because the supply is about 10 times that, and the longest you'll have to wait is about 2 weeks, if you have to wait at all. Kia has just had a rebranding that's given it a new logo and a new slogan, but the e-Niro is stuck with the old badge. The reversing camera is cunningly concealed within the rear windscreen wiper. That's quite boring, isn't it? The e-Niro, like every other Kia, gets a fantastic 7-year, 100,000 mile warranty, which is better than every other EV on sale. But what about pricing? Well, the e-Niro is actually one of the more expensive cars among its rivals. If you compare it to something like an MG ZS EV, that is significantly cheaper, but then that's kind of the thing with that car, isn't it? Against the Peugeot E2008, that also costs a bit less. And also our favourite version of the VW ID3 offers a very similar package to what the e-Niro offers, but costs less.
It's also similar money to the bigger Skoda Enyaq. And if you want to see exactly how those 2 cars compare, subscribe to our channel to watch our group test when it goes live.
So the Kia e-Niro isn't quite such a new thing in the electric car world anymore, but it is still thoroughly recommendable and really fantastic. The only shame is that the smaller battery version isn't a bit more competitive, but if you go for the 64 kilowatt hour e-Niro, you get something with a massive range that's comfortable, good to drive, decent inside, spacious as well. It's a properly good all-round electric car. For even more information on the e-Niro, you can go to whatcar.com to read our written review of this car and every other new car on sale. And when you're there, you can also see our list of brilliant deals on every new car, and you could save yourself thousands of pounds. If you've enjoyed this video or found it helpful, it'd be great if you gave it a like, and make sure you tell us what you think of the car in the comments below. And do subscribe so that you can see all of our latest video reviews. Thanks for watching.